Hey there, I'm Lainey Lipsky, parenting coach and master teacher. Parenting is hard. I totally get it, and I'm here to make it easier for you. Especially if you had a tough childhood or you've got a tough child now, I've got your back. So take a deep breath, relax, and check out this clip from my coaching group this week. And remember to hit like and subscribe if you like my vibe. Let's get started. I wanted to talk briefly about this little parenting thing called yelling. And for any of you who grew up with a parent who yelled a lot, you know how bad that feels to be on the receiving end of it. And even if you didn't grow up with that, if you're somebody who has become a yeller, you know that it doesn't feel good to be yelling and watching the pain and the consternation and the fear maybe that it causes on your child's face, or as they get older, it might not be fear or consternation. It might just be like tuning you out and ignoring you more. No matter how you slice the pie, the yelling pie, it's not tasty. It's not tasty to serve it, and it's not tasty to eat it. Okay. So there's so much research right now that's available around yelling. I encourage you, if you want to look it up, go ahead and Google it. Um, you're going to find things that say research is telling us now that lots of yelling can create an ongoing stress response in a child that leads to other things when they're older, such as depression and high risk activities, drug use, um, lots of things that we don't want them to be doing, or having low self-esteem, low confidence, low motivation, right? All these things if they're somebody who is receiving toxic levels of being yelled at. And what I want to do is unpack a little piece of that today to help you understand what's going on, because I think sometimes as parents, we go to one side or the other. We don't necessarily know objectively if we're yelling too much or we're not yelling too much. And people will ask me that a lot. Like, well, is there, when does yelling become toxic, right? Like how much yelling is too much? And is it realistic to even think that somebody might not yell at all ever? I think it is possible. I know people who are not yellers, they don't yell. Um, but they also don't show a lot of emotion on the other side of yelling. Most of the time, people who are yellers, who have a temper, also are able to show great joy and great excitement. And there's a beauty in that. There's a beauty in being able to feel your full range of emotions. So what I want to do is not cut off that spectrum of emotions for you. If you're somebody who feels a lot of emotion and expresses a lot of emotion towards your kids, I just want to channel it in a way that is not going to be harmful to your kids, if that makes sense. So there are a few kinds of yelling. Let's just start there, okay? There's the kind of yelling where when you're at a sports event or you're excited about something and you see somebody and you haven't seen them in a long time and you're like, wow, and you're yelling, right? Or you're yelling for your team, or you're rooting for your team. That kind of yelling or cheering, you're at a concert, or after a play and you're hooting and hollering, like that's yelling, right? You're yelling out bravo or brava, right? That's perfectly like healthy, happy kind of yelling. I want to start there because I want you to see that it's actually an expression of feeling. Yelling is a way to express feeling. Okay, so there's nothing inherently bad about yelling. However, there's another kind of yelling that is not helpful to help create bonds with you and your kids. And I'm going to get to that one third. The second kind of yelling I want to talk about is the kind of yelling when somebody is getting into danger and you're watching them get into danger. So a child picking up a knife or picking up something really heavy that you know they can't manage, or running into a street and you yell to them, stop doing that, be careful, right? Like, again, it's an expression of emotion, in this case, fear, and you want them to stop doing what they're doing. That also, not necessarily a bad way to yell, it can be very helpful, especially if it gets your kids' attention and they kind of freeze in their tracks. If you want them to freeze in their tracks, that's usually what happens. If they don't hear you, they don't hear you, and that's usually not the case when you've gotten your kids' attention with their name, right? And you told them to stop, that's usually a freeze response. So just be mindful that if you do that, your child, if they freeze and there's something that's coming their way, like a bicycle or somebody on their skateboard, they might actually stop in the path of that thing that's coming at them. Okay. So just think about that. The third kind of yelling is the kind that I think puts a huge dent and a shadow over parent-child relationships. And that third type of yelling is when a parent has gotten so frustrated and feels so powerless and so resentful that they just vent and they say a whole bunch of things with a harsh tone that later on they need to apologize for. The big thing here, the thing that differentiates it from maybe yelling at somebody going into the street is when there are names, negative comments attached to the yelling, when there's any kind of shame attached to the yelling. So I'm calling that out because even when we maybe yell at our kids to stop in the street, to stop from running in the street, we'll say, "What are you doing? Like, don't be so stupid," right? Like that little tale of calling them a name, even when you're trying to get them to stop, is the kind of yelling that is damaging to kids. So if you are somebody who is yelling a lot at home and you are attaching, let's just call it commentary to the yelling, then you're actually, and I know you don't want to be doing this, but you are actually creating a damaging cycle, not only between you and your child, but also within your child, the way that he or she learns to talk to him or herself. The way that we see that cropping up later in life is for people who, you know them as well as I do. Maybe you're one of them. This is something I struggle with myself. When you make a mistake and you say to yourself, "God, that was so stupid. How could you be so stupid, Lainey?" Right? That would be an example of me saying that to myself. You're so thoughtless, or you just don't pay attention, or, like the negative, harassing self-talk to yourself, your inner critic is the development of that voice that you picked up from your parents, usually your parents, over time. It can be from other places as well, but the primary inner critic is from your parent. We just internalize that voice. So if you are doing, and I know it's not, I'm not trying to make you feel ashamed. I'm trying to bring this to light. If you're nodding along, you're like, "That's the kind of yelling I do, and I can't stop it." Like once I start yelling, all the words come out and I can't control it. That's a really painful place to be. And I just want to acknowledge that if you're nodding along and that sounds like you and feels like you, it's not a place that you want to be, and it's not a place that you have to be anymore. So the first step would be to stop stop the any kind of name, shame, or blaming, name calling, shaming, or blaming with your yelling. That would be a very, very useful first step. And unfortunately, there's no real amount of apologizing after you've called somebody names, especially your own children, that can undo the fact, like they can't unhear it from you. Even if later on you say, "I'm so sorry I called you a brat," right? "I'm so sorry I called you spoiled. I'm so sorry I called you other things that you may call your child in the heat of the moment." It doesn't take away that sting and that trauma to their soul of hearing themselves being called that. So at the very least, first step is remove the naming, the name calling, excuse me, the shaming and the blaming from that yelling. So we'll begin there, okay? Just as an awareness of where it kind of teeters into toxic levels of yelling. The next thing I want to point out is that in order to change a habit, and yelling is as much a habit, it's a habit of mind, it's a habit of your body because your body is getting stressed out, your stress response is being activated, just like I talked about when you're yelling in good ways at a sports game or a concert, you're yelling out of safety, right? Those are both expressions of your nervous system being activated. So is it true that when you're yelling out of anger and frustration, it's a venting of your expression, okay? And it's okay for you to have emotion in your voice. It's okay for you to express frustration, to say, I'm really frustrated right now. Your tone can change. You can modulate your tone so that your kids can hear the feeling behind what you're saying. Otherwise, you're just going to be deadpan and monotone all the time, and that's robotic. That's not human. You want them to be able to hear the change in your tone. And at the same time, you don't want to be crossing over into that level of yelling to where you're not controlling what is coming out of your mouth. And that takes a lot of restraint and a lot of training. So, the first step in breaking that habit of just your nervous system reacting and you flying off at the mouth, right, is to make a real decision to change your identity. And this I know is going to sound like, I don't know what it's going to sound like to you. Maybe it'll sound awesome to you, but it's awesome for me to think about changing a habit from the inside out rather than working always from the outside in. So we kind of do have to do both as parents, okay? Because parenting is an inside job for sure, and it combines the outer work of what we're doing with our kids every single minute of every single day. So the very first step to stopping to yell, I told you an outside step, which is to take off the name calling, the blaming, and the shaming, okay? The first inside step is to change your identity, to make a decision that you actually are not going to be a yeller or a toxic yeller. And once you make that decision and once you start identifying as somebody who is not a toxic yeller, who's not a yeller, trust me when I say the other pieces of this puzzle are going to start falling into place. There's a ton of research. One of my favorites is showing about this habit research. One of my favorite pieces around people who are smoking, and if there's not a more powerful habit than smoking, it's so compelling and so powerful and so linked to so many things. Stress, relaxation, socializing, right? But people who are most successful at quitting smoking were the people who said, I'm not a smoker or I don't smoke. They just started saying that, even if they were still smoking. Because what happens in your brain is once you say one thing, if your body is doing something else, your brain doesn't like it. Your brain doesn't like to have that dissonance. It's called cognitive dissonance. It doesn't like to be believing one thing and doing something else. It doesn't feel right. And so, habit building research shows that the more you tell yourself, I am not, and we're trying to break a habit, I'm not this, I'm not a smoker, I'm not a yeller. Every time that you, as a smoker, pick up a cigarette, every time that you yell, if that's what we're talking about, your your body, your being is going to experience this cognitive dissonance. And the more that you reinforce it in your belief and in your brain and in what you say to yourself, the more your body is going to learn how to match your brain. So we're sort of working off of two ends of the puzzle here. We're burning the candle at both ends, whatever you want to say, whatever that saying is. We want to focus on what we're doing on the outside with our kids, and on the inside, we want to start shifting our identity and going after what we're feeling, which I'll talk about next time. Okay? So keep those things in mind. And that is going to be our first step toward yelling, toward not yelling, toward stopping yelling, if that's a habit for you. I really hope this video was helpful to you. Feel free to share it and use the comments to ask a question or to request a topic for the future. We've got links below for free support with things like discipline, teaching your kids how to be more gritty, and how to be more patient with your kids, plus access to my free coaching group. So be sure to check those links out. And remember, we get one shot at parenthood. Our kids only get one shot at their childhood, so let's make it count. Click like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.